Ever struggle with God? Or perhaps even more personally, ever struggle with God's timing? This is Father Mark over at Christ the Redeemer Catholic Church in Thibodaux. I want to welcome you to week 2 in our podcast conversation entitled Intentional. And we are in this Lent together trying to choose, be more intentional about saying yes to God and living in our commitment as a disciple of Jesus Christ. And a lot of times that's in the small steps, that's in the practical details, that's in the everyday of life. And that's real easy for us when we hear God and see God and know that He's moving in our life. But to be intentional about our commitment as a disciple of Jesus Christ when God's not as clear to us, when we maybe don't hear His voice or we don't see His action, or when we're waiting on God to respond to us. That's a whole thing entirely altogether. And that's what we see in the first reading at Mass today at Christ the Redeemer. This weekend, we're going to unpack how Abram had to wait on God. He had this awesome promise, right, that God was going to move mountains in his life and bless him with children as numerous as stars in the sky. However, Abram had to wait on that prayer, and his faith was tested. He struggled to believe that God was going to come through in His promise. And again, my question to you is, have you ever struggled with God? Have you ever had to wait on God to respond to you? And if you have, what's your most common response to waiting on God? We can learn a lot about ourselves and about God if we look at not only His pattern of answering our prayers on His timing, not ours, but how is it that we often respond to that. So the first thing that we can do today is we can look inside our hearts, because if we're going to learn this week, we're going to learn more from our personal experience than from the words that I'm speaking to you. And so my encouragement to you today is to look inside your heart and to ask yourself the following question. When's the last time you had to wait on God? And perhaps even more importantly, when's the last time you had to wait on God when it was really personal? When you were asking for either a miracle in your life or a miracle in someone else's life. And if you're on the journey and you don't have a church home, then I just want to invite you to join us at Christ the Redeemer. Now, there's a lot of people at Christ the Redeemer who are asking the same questions you are. There's a lot of us together who are searching for God in the midst of ordinary life, and in that ordinary life where it's sometimes messy. And so if you don't have a church home and you would benefit from walking with other people and maybe a message today that can help you, then I want to invite you to join us over on Talbot Avenue. However, if you don't join us, I certainly want to invite you back this week as we look in the podcast series about how we can learn about God, about what He's doing, if we have the courage to ask ourselves, what happens in God's timing, not our timing? So let me give you a preview of the week. Early in the week, what we're going to do is we're going to ask ourselves, why is it that God acts how He does? And what is it that perhaps God is doing when we don't see Him doing anything? That's going to give you a lot of hope. And then at the end of the week, we're going to land the plane, going to give you some practical things that you can do as you're waiting on God. And that's going to give you a lot of hope. So this week's going to be filled with lots of hope as we can together grow in our ability to be intentional, to choose, even when we're waiting on God. So whether we see you at Mass today at Christ Redeemer, or whether we meet again in the podcast series tomorrow as we choose to be intentional with God in the waiting, I hope that your day is filled with grace. Enjoy the Sabbath day. And until we meet, God bless you.